the win in that is, right, like, no benefits. They're not
Thank you for your
necessarily.
patience. We're going to get
Yeah.
started in just a few minutes, so appreciate it.
I don't know. What would be like the convincing piece of it? Like the money saver, more people being remote, being able to do the work and submit via Zoom. I'm going off track. I'm sorry, we're just talking about the Chicago Bears, yeah, and like, yeah.
We're still missing one of our speakers. If we can maybe move towards the middle and leave this one empty. All right. How are we doing? Good morning. Good morning. Buenos días. ¿Cómo estamos? How are we doing today? Get excited. It's day one. Day one. We've got a great program for you these next couple of days. Right now, we are in the Affirmative Inaction Impact of the Policies Repeal session. So double check, you know where you are. If you're not, it's still a great session, so stay. My name is Lisandra Jimenez. I'm a program manager with HACE. We're happy to have you here with us today. I will go ahead and introduce who we have on this discussion for the session for today. So as our moderator, we have Suheily Natal Davis, who is the VP and Global Chief Diversity Officer of McDonald's. And then our speakers, we have Tanya Cabrera, who is the Assistant Vice Provost for Student Inclusion at UIC. We have Terry Mena, who is the VP for Student Affairs and Dean of Students at Northeastern Illinois University. And then we have Matthew Grimes, who is Head of DEI in the Cleveland Guardians for MLB, Major League Baseball. So we have a great panel, a great discussion up ahead of us. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to our moderator, Suheily, to get us started. Enjoy.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you all for your patience. I am eager to jump into this topic. So let's just get started. Tanya, I'm going to start with you. Just set the foundation for us, right? We're here to talk about what potentially could happen with the repeal of affirmative action, but what is affirmative action? Kind of what is its history? How did we get here?
Yeah, I think, is this on? Yeah, right? Okay, cool. That goes back. Thank you so much for having this honest conversation with, the people who are directly impacted, right? It's an important conversation that we should be having constantly, and how we're not at the table and when we should be at the table. And when we're not there, what happens, right? Decisions are being made. And so it's important, as a very large, diverse minority, Afro-Americano, Latino, the very dispersed of our community and our Latinx community, we have to look at the basis of, the generations of individuals who have been impacted by affirmative action, which allowing women and Native American women back in as late as 1980s, right? Access to opportunities, and then the population changed and it became the minority serving population, right? African American and Latino students, those with disabilities, and that's a community that I think gets left out a lot. And in higher ed, which I've been for a while now, specifically working with undocumented students, right? The conversation of our Ukrainian, European undocumented student population, which is the largest in the state of Illinois right now, followed by our Latino and then our African American community. And so looking at this diverse demographic and recognizing that it's an increase in population in higher ed, and now this decision, coming forward and its impact in financial funding on all spectrums, because the finances, right? In order to continue your education, you need some money, whether it be in loans, and it's something that a lot of times Latino families in particular will not take that option, right? And so looking at the years of affirmative action and its impact not only on finances, but access to opportunities, right? We know that the institution and the market is competitive, right? But also allowing access to opportunities to fellowships. And I hope that that's something that our corporate side can talk about with regards to having these opportunities accessible to all diverse populations, right? As the demographic is changing in higher ed, it's not your average, high school student coming in, but more transfer students enrolling and more immigrant students enrolling in the state of Illinois. And so I don't want to go off tangent here, but with this impact, what it means is that how will we equitably offer opportunities to minorities, not only in the state of Illinois, but at a national level? And how does that impact our growth, our generational wealth building? And what do we need to share with employers to continue this pipeline, right? We don't want to break it off. We want to be of service. We should have these opportunities. And I'm not sure what opportunities you had as a college student, right? And it didn't happen until after college. You're like, oh, my boy hooked me up with an internship, right? Or maybe you knew someone. But access to opportunities and networking is something that I hope a pipeline that can continue. Also looking at private contractual work with affirmative action, saying like, hey, we have specific projects, right? ASA does a lot of work with outreach and marketing. And so with that lens, how can we contract a co-op opportunity with minority serving institutions, HSIs, HBCUs? How do we keep these pipelines open? And it's a conversation we have to have because we need this pipeline to continue because it is such a growing population. I'll stop, bro, because I'm gonna go.
No, that's really helpful. So, Terry, I'll go to you. So with Tanya laying the foundation that, at the foundation of affirmative action is greater access to opportunity and equal access to opportunity. So you being in education and higher education, how does the policy of affirmative action kind of impact your day-to-day, and how would the repeal now impact how you approach your work?
Yeah, thank you. That's a very important question. And also just to also add to the conversation, the decision that was made last year by the United States Supreme Court was focusing more on making sure institutions of higher education are not using race in the criteria of the admissions process. And so institutions, elite institutions like Harvard University and University of UNC, which were the two institutions that were highlighted in this case, it has a significant impact to those elite institutions and those high-performing, excelling students who are of diverse background. But at NEIU, as my institution and my fellow institutions, UIC and all the other state universities, at NEIU, we don't use race as a criteria for admissions. We solely base admissions by GPA. And so even with this law going into, or the change into affirmative action for admission standards, our mission-driven ability to continue to diversify our campus, to either strive to or continue to thrive as a diverse community of learners is really important. So this decision doesn't stop those institutions. It just helps us to rethink how we do our work and how we make our commitments to higher education for a diverse community of people. And there's layers to this, right? There is the pipeline into employment. There's also contracts, employment processes, not only in higher education, but across the country. So ultimately, every institution has to take a look at, and did take a look at, what their process looked like on the front end and what those implications meant as they go through admissions process. So I got a little technical there, but ultimately the impact is how do we redefine, how do we reimagine to ensure that the pipeline looks just like this room, right? That you see a diversity of people from all walks of life, from all cultural and racial backgrounds that are engaged in higher education. And it really puts the test on many institutions, including NEIU, to say, do we need to move into communities, or are we already in communities that represent the student body we want, right? And how do we serve them? How do we continue to ensure first-generation students, low-income students, students of diverse populations are served in higher education?
No, that's really kind of helpful framing. So, you know, before we move to Matthew and the private sector and into the work that we do in recruitment and retention, I want to pause a little bit in thinking about how all of this, both the recent decision and all of the rhetoric surrounding it, might be impacting the pipeline even before applications are made to institutions of higher learning. So Terry, while your institution didn't use any indication of race as a plus factor as the ones that were subject to the Harvard litigation, many schools did, and in accordance with well-settled precedent, they were, you know, until recently, that was perfectly legal and applicable. And so now it's really leaving folks entering the higher education space with a question on like how to approach this application season and the application process. And I was listening to a podcast and I found it really interesting. They were talking to a group of Black and Latino high school juniors, and they were really conflicted on whether or not they should make reference to their background, both demographically, socioeconomically, racially. They should make reference to that background in their essays, because now they're worried that it actually could be used against them. And so I guess, you know, for those of you that are in the higher learning space, how, you know, is it too soon to tell how you're seeing this might impact your applicant pool? You know, any recommendations on how folks might approach that? Because it seems like it could potentially even have a chilling effect on where folks apply even before the applications are reviewed.
Yeah, I think as a public institution and Northeastern being a partner in 10 other institutions in Illinois, we all take a holistic approach in reviewing our applicants. We know that students may not have extracurricular activities, you know, on there, but they show leadership, right? They take care of their siblings after school, or maybe they're, you know, still first generation. It's not something that we would dismiss, but we know that grit carries a long way along with academics, right? There are certain requirements. Our admissions process with regards to GPA has not changed. But we all take that holistic approach and like, oh, what does that mean? You're just being so nice. But really looking at the students, right? We have support networks on our campus. You know, I just went to Provost Palante's event. Congratulations, NEIU. And having these support networks, you know, no longer work in silos, but work collectively, right, with one another. So that we could review these applicants and these students and admissions and say, hey, you belong here, right? We offer this opportunity to you in this field of study, and ensuring that matriculation, right? It's one thing to recruit them, but it's also another thing to make sure that they're successful and they successfully matriculate. And I always say we have to have job placement prior to commencement, right? Before you leave our institution, right? We want to make sure that you've had the opportunity to do a fellowship, do an internship, whether your immigration status, you know, is DACA or I-10, or if you have pathway as a citizen or an international student. But I think the big thing with this decision and its impact in admissions, I don't want students to defer from telling their story, right? Every student has a story to tell, and we want to know it. But it's an overview of the individual itself, and really assuring that, like, hey, you had the GPA, your ACT score is not there, but you talked about having, you know, dyslexia, right? And looking at that whole application and having our support networks on campus help us review applications as well and say, like, hey, well, I got some money if it's financial issues, you know, the mother's going through cancer. So we take all these things into consideration in creating, not only in admissions, but financial funding for each of our applications. And that's UIC, but I mean, I think it's across the board, right? The students are why we have these positions, right? And we want to ensure their success rate, but we're not going to discriminate these applicants just because this decision, is on the floor. And so we want to make sure that students, if they want to have a conversation with someone in admissions and speak to an academic advisor, come visit our campuses, right? But we have to make sure that we are being equitable in all these opportunities, like I said, and making sure that we're not leaving everybody out. A former governor who helped pass the DREAM Act used to say everybody in and nobody out. And this decision at UIC in particular will not impact our admissions.
Well, I'll say as employers, who are very cognizant of the type of pipeline of talent that we want to make sure is coming into our system. I mean, we certainly appreciate that continued holistic review. And any assurances that we can make to kind of work together to make sure that the pipeline is still just as strong. And so I guess to you, Matthew, how are you thinking about this potential repeal of this policy and its impact on your workforce?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I appreciate being here today. I think what's really important, what we heard is representation matters, right? And regardless of the decision that was made and how it impacts higher education, we know in Major League Baseball that the game is growing, right? And the game is growing in racially diverse communities. You heard earlier, if you're at the cafecito, 20% of our population is Latino. In baseball, 30% of our players are Latino, right? So shame on us if we don't have that representation, because we're in a game of competition, right? In my case, with the Cleveland Guardians, we've got to be better than 29 other teams. And the way that we do that is by developing our players. And when 40% of our players are Latino, we need individuals who are culturally competent, who understand not only from a linguistic standpoint, but from an educational standpoint, how do you interact? How do you coach? How do you develop the best players to put on the field in order to win? And I think that's no different across any space, whether it's the financial industry or the healthcare, right? We need culturally competent individuals to make us better, right? I think affirmative action is often misunderstood, but it's an antidote to unearned privilege, right? And so when you have the opportunity to create diversity pipeline programs that allow historically marginalized and underserved student groups to then filter into the workforce, everybody benefits, right? And the data shows that. And so I think the way we're thinking about it at the Guardians and overall in Major League Baseball is to continue to be mindful of the various attacks that are happening on DEI, but also to not waver in our commitment to understanding why it's important to have a racially, ethnically, linguistically diverse workforce, because it only makes us better and more competitive.
Yeah, I like that, reassurance, because I think many of us might be, whether it's an institution of higher learning or a private company, there seems to be a bit of a panic kind of in the external sphere. And I think reclaiming the narrative a bit to say, like where you started, Terry, listen, this is what it is and this is what it isn't, and I think for us, with my company, it's been trying to be really clear on like, this is what actually changed and this is what remains the same. And we talk a lot about the risk of, externally, there's a lot of conversation about the risk to DEI, but I don't think we're talking enough about the risk that exists if we stop this work. We are still, for us as private employers, we are still 100% responsible for providing safe, equitable, respectful, and inclusive workplaces, right? That doesn't change. And so I think really trying to reclaim that narrative a bit and reframe the conversation around the fact that regardless of what the rhetoric is externally, we still have responsibilities to our stakeholders to provide both the educational spaces where they can thrive and the corporate workplaces where they can thrive. I know you were jumping in to say something earlier around the pipeline work, so I want to make sure you have a chance to come back to that.
Sorry, I just wanted to say that. Okay. ASA does a really good job about connecting individuals. And so coming here today, networking with people like, hey, I met this person that did this, and having those opportunities to connect not only to people in the field, but to future job opportunities. Like, hey, we had this marketing pitch, right? And so I just want to compliment ASE on the work that you guys are doing in ensuring that this pipeline continues and having these conversations as the beginning, but holding our partnerships, right? Us as institutions, businesses, private employers, right? Accountability. And so I think ASE does a very good job at not only doing that, but holding employers accountable through the powers of leadership from those members in this office. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and thanks for the partnership. Go ahead, Derek.
And can I just add a couple of things that both of my colleagues have said so far and highlight that, and you alluded to earlier, this just happened last year. And when it was coming and when it happened, there were, even on my campus, a lot of rumors and misunderstanding and to your point about reclaiming this. I think that's the part of it is activities like this, discussions like this helps us to define exactly what was decided and what does the implications mean. And we're only a few months in. And yes, it does and has created a little bit of anxiety with our potential applicant pools coming in, but to the great comment that Tanya made about encouraging your students to reach out to an admissions person at that institution of interest. And I'm gonna be honest, and I'm gonna go back 30 years. I'm not gonna go to a school that doesn't want me. So if that school has that criteria and they don't want me, then I'm gonna find a place that wants me, right? And that I can thrive in and that's gonna see me for who I am, as Tanya said, the holistic me.
Do you think, and I know it's asking us to see into the future, but do you think that this might result in more students thinking a lot more strategically about attending Hispanic serving institutions or HBCUs? Can you get a sense of how this might impact the trends for where folks are going to matriculate?
So before the pandemic, Nathan Grau, who is a well-known researcher in enrollment trends for higher education, had already predicted that we were going to be seeing a slowdown in enrollment 10 years out. And then the pandemic happened and it accelerated that. And in his research, which is continuing to be reevaluated, and he just published another report this past year, an update from his original data set, as is and will continue to be, Latino and Hispanics are going to be the #1 eligible college age ready students in the future. And you're seeing an explosion of that with the fact that we have, if you go back 10 years, there were only a handful of Hispanic serving institutions across the country, to now it's being doubled, if not tripled. And then we have a huge pipeline of Hispanic serving institutions who are on the cusp of reaching that definition of being Hispanic serving, right? So I think what surprises me when you see big flagship schools start to leverage and try to become Hispanic serving institutions, and what does that mean for institutions like Northeastern Illinois University, like UIC, who were, in my opinion, the groundbreakers in the Midwest to serving the Latino Hispanic community. Tanya was kind enough to reference our Proyecto Pa'lante program, which is targeted to helping retain our Latino, and originally recruit, retain, and help those students thrive with Latino, Latina, Latinx, and Hispanic communities over close to 50 years now. So I think that the piece here is, it's going back to what was said, is the commitment to our work. It's the commitment to the communities we serve. And future-wise, to a point you made earlier about your question, we do need to keep our eye on the ball and not allow the public policy or the legal or the courts to define where this could go, because we're still bound by state and federal laws to ensure that we are providing equal opportunity to employment opportunities in our workplace. So we're still bound by that. So I think it's still early. We're still understanding what the ramifications mean. I think these sessions help to clarify and to reemphasize our commitment. And so I appreciate this opportunity.
Tanya, you touched a little bit earlier on kind of that public-private partnership. And so what can those of us in the room, I'm sure we have people in academia, we have people in government, in the private sector. How do we support each other in Terry's point, like keeping our eye on the ball?
I'm a big data person, so looking at the numbers, right? Like, what's the leading trend in job opportunities now? Telling students, like, hey, you might want to open your own business. I was like, you're a great artist. There's a co-op in Logan Square, right? Connecting them to resources within their community, their nearby community, and being committed to offering these opportunities, right? We have to pass the baton, right? Like, I'm not that old, but we're getting up there, and so it's important to share this information. Why keep it when we could build our wealth as a community and have an impact to doing business with one another and seeing our communities grow and flourish, right? And I have to bring up the Bears press release yesterday, right? And the $8 billion that will be invested privately into the state. And what does that do? Ensuring, again, that we're at the table, that our students have opportunities to be interns during these press releases and hear these opportunities and say, like, hey, I just wanted to mention, you should include, those students with disabilities, mental health, in the Auburn Gresham neighborhood. Don't forget about this population, and using data that they're learning from our professors in partnerships with entrepreneurship, where they work with everybody from different sectors. But coming in and, have you ever gone back to visit your institution and talk about your role? Come during the visit day. Just have an opportunity to anybody who reached out to you to LinkedIn, like, hey, can I have a 10-minute Zoom with you? I just want to introduce myself and where I plan to do. And we'd love for you to come speak to, a $250 honorarium. No, but coming to speak to campus and be on the panel, request a career services, right? I want those partnerships to still have those pipelines available and really see the demographic of, we have to teach them, we have to talk about money sooner than later, right? And we have to work with different aspects in the sports. You have a sports therapist. Oh, I got a great masseuse. Let me recommend you to a student, right? And so offering these opportunities and partnerships with word of mouth, networking, those have to continue. ASA has to continue, right? Investing and making sure corporations are investing in organizations like this to bring people together, to share these resources and have these honest conversations of, we have to be at this table to make these decisions. And we want to collaborate. It's not just, our Latino students, but our students at Collective as a society, right? We have to be committed to building each other up instead of trying to pass each other up. And so I think that these partnerships have to continue. And I know with ASA and partners like McDonald's and, the MLB, oh, bro, I can't wait to see the games. It's going to be money. But these are all opportunities that need to stay open. And these honest conversations with you here, and I look forward to hearing questions about, like, hey, bro, I got a side hustle. Here it is, right? And so that we could share those conversations with one another and support each other and build that pipeline and pass that baton. And it's not a competition amongst our institutions, but NEAU has been doing it. UIC got some work to do, right? But we're growing, but we want to make sure that we don't want that 6 to 9 year pipeline, right? That, back in 2014, 6 to 8 years to complete their bachelor's because students had to drop in and out because that was real, the finances to keep up. Hey, I went to the community college, then I went to 4-year school. I visited, I was every university, right? But making sure that students don't have to digress and lose financial funding, right? Making sure that they utilize that funding, support networks. I'm gonna stop, but taking advantage of these pipelines. Tell students, like, hey, go check out your career services. Hold us accountable for delivering to the next generation of people who are gonna be working with you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Matthew, any thoughts on that partnership?
I think from our vantage point, what I'm hearing and what I want to amplify is the importance of sponsorship and mentorship, right? We all in this room need to be connectors, and we need to connect our students to these opportunities, to these networks, whether we're in a hiring process or we're just socially gathering. I think it's critical for that partnership to continue to build and flourish because, again, we see it. We know the future of our pipeline is built through these institutions. And I think to the question earlier as well, and students being really cognizant of the repeal of affirmative action and how that impacts. I think a lot of us in the corporate space are also using that as an opportunity to think through what else can we do, whether that's by creating, again, more internship and fellowship opportunities. My colleague from the Dodgers are in the room, and they do an amazing job with internships and fellowships to make sure that we're creating a seat at the table and making sure that, again, we're balancing those counter narratives. We want to hear those stories, and we know that, again, historically marginalized individuals come with stories of grit and resilience. Those are the things that help us win baseball games and help us be competitive. And so we don't want to silence voices. We actually want to amplify them. And I think we do that through connection, through the LinkedIn sharing, through networking, through really deliberate and intentional opportunities to bring people together and to share the human resources and the human aspect of this work.
I want to echo this fantastic comments of the importance of sponsorship and mentorship, which is very important. I serve as a mentor. I get mentored as well. I like to call them my council of mentors that are individuals across the country who, depending on the scenario, I can pick up the phone and call them like, you have a little bit of knowledge on this. Can we have a conversation? But I also want to elevate, knowing the capture audience we have today, is that I do want to emphasize the importance of paid internships for low-income, first-generation students who are struggling to pay their education, even at affordable institutions like UIC and NEIU. They still are struggling to figure out how to pay the tuition, how to help mom and dad at home, help with financing, and et cetera. And so that's really, I want to elevate the importance of the space you all are in to be able to create paid internships. I also want to elevate, and I wouldn't be doing my job as the Vice President of Student Affairs at NEIU, a perfect example of how, while this legal decision was made, NEIU still stride forward, and we have a new program called NEIU for You, where if a student meets a household income of $75,000 or less, and they have the GPA requirement of a 2.0 or better, they're automatically admitted to the university. And we do a top-off after their state and federal financial aid is applied. Any remaining gap, the university covers that gap. So it's a great opportunity, and that's the creative way to ensure the diversity and pipeline in our institution.
Yeah, no, I think that's so wonderful, right? For many folks, that makes the difference in the trajectory of their life, right? And I want to, before we go to questions, highlight, you talked about several programs, you talked about internships and fellowships. These programs can continue. And so some of us might be at institutions where, people are in a panic and the response to the decision has been, oh, we've got to shut everything down. And I encourage us to all educate ourselves and really, agitate and push our institutions to say, no. Maybe we need to look again at how we're wording the requirements. Maybe we need to look again at, how we're framing the program. But that's the solution, is to evolve and elevate the program and focus on that continued access to opportunity. None of this, the external rhetoric will have you thinking that our work is limiting, restrictive, pitting groups against each other, when it's the absolute opposite, right? It's broadening the aperture, broadening the pipeline, broadening the opportunities, and our programs, our internship, our fellowship programs, do just that. And so, really challenge ourselves and our institutions to rise to the occasion, to continue this work in a way that continues to create access for all, versus doing what I think is the lazy, if I may say, taking that approach to just say, oh, we just can't, so we're going to stop. And so with that, I will open up for any questions to our esteemed panelists.
Okay, so we have a couple minutes for questions. I'm going to have my colleague George stay on this side. I'm going to go to the other side, and we're going to take questions from the audience. So anybody have a first burning question? All right, we'll start here.
First, thank you all for doing this. We really appreciate this. Given the state DEI and affirmative action, and sometimes it's the perception of an attack on these, um, what's happening. Is there any change in verbiage or language that you use to articulate the same message, but also aware of what the environment is? Is there some word choices that you have to change, or anything like that that you can maybe pass on?
Yeah, I think language really matters in this work when we're having conversations about elevating the voices of marginalized identities and individuals. In the higher ed space, I've seen a lot of institutions, at least in the Midwest here in Ohio, shift language from offices of DEI to things like student belonging or inclusive excellence, which I think is important, but I don't want the core of why these programs and offices exist to be lost. Again, it's to create equity and opportunity for students who have historically not been given the opportunity to succeed and thrive. And so from our vantage point, and again, we've got to give a lot of credit to the commissioner's office at Major League Baseball, who've openly said that we want to stand on the right side of history, right? And so while I think we've seen a lot of organizations change language or the way in which we present the work, it's really telling who's really committed to uplifting Latinos, Blacks, queers, Indigenous, Native individuals. And so I would caution the dramatic shift of language, but at the end of the day, it's really just a conversation about equity and how do we level the playing field.
I think that question could be slightly answered differently if we were in the state of Texas, state of Florida, South Carolina, and some of the other Midwest states. I think what's profound about the state of Illinois is our deep resound and commitment to ensuring the diversity of our communities and uplifting those communities. And so I think that is one of the big reasons why I'm here in Illinois. I was in Texas, I was in Florida, and I think that's the commitment and the environment that I thrive in and I want to be in, because like I said earlier, I want to be in a state that wants me, right? So I echo our colleagues' comments there and just say that we just, again, keep our eye on the ball. It is an attack, but how do we reframe it to continue the work we're doing in a different kind of way?
I think with regards to, you'll hear a lot of holistic, inclusiveness, equitable. All the institutions 5 years ago signed on to the equity bill for state of Illinois, still requesting 60% graduation rate for minorities in the state. But how are we doing that, right? And having these conversations with higher ed and partners is very important, because we need to be at the table, right? With Cherry's position and my position, like, you cannot exclude us, right? We had to make sure that these institutions, your former alma maters, are held accountable to ensuring the success rate of individuals that look like you, right? And being mindful of the verbiage, because words matter, and it'll impact how a student feels. It'll impact if you're going to have to go through litigation, right? And so being mindful of our verbiage that we use, but I think particularly equity, belonging, sense of belonging on campus, DEIB, UIC is now diversity, equity, and engagement, but now like, oh, we got to have belonging. And belonging also includes our LGBTQI, our students with disabilities, those with visual and non-visual disabilities, and being mindful of those students who are dealing with mental health issues that have yet to be diagnosed, right? And making sure that our institutions and our community, when money comes in, right? Because we're like right up Lakeshore Drive, maybe you should get some of that 8 billion, bro. We talk, right? Because we want to have, yeah, I know. And those conversations have to happen. And so it's pay attention of how people are talking, and then you'll see how they're going to be moving in the future.
I don't disagree at all with any of my colleagues. I think they're very valid points, and yes, words do matter, and it is important for people to to listen and see how the work is being described. I think I would add to that that it is quite a nuanced conversation. And so I would encourage all of us to remember that, you know, I'm an attorney. And so I'd be remiss if we didn't acknowledge that it is a balancing of risk in how you talk about things and the attention that might be called to your programs, especially if you're in different geographies. And so I think it's a yes and, you know, yes, words matter. The actions underlying those words, I think, matter even more. And so it is, you know, the way that I approach me personally, you know, this work is that, yes, how I describe it matters, how I do it and my ability to continue to do it and not have to be distracted by litigation or external conversations also matters to me too. And so if we have a limited capacity or bandwidth to do the work, you know, do I want to spend most of my time on fighting about how something is labeled, or do I just want to be able to put on the program, you know? And so have some grace, I think, with us that are navigating these conversations and just, you know, for all of us, I think we need to appropriately agitate and push each other to make sure we're doing the right thing for the right reasons, but it's rarely kind of black and white based on the language.
Thank you for all your insights. My question, more so specifically for the private sector, will be to ensure longevity and expansion of DEI initiatives. How or what are some of the metrics that specifically MLB or McDonald's is using to quantify the impact long-term in your organizations?
I think it goes a lot of ways, right? From the sense of employee belonging and engagement. So if you have ERGs or BRGs, making sure that you have metrics behind them to present the ROI of why investment happens. In the talent acquisition and the talent development space, I think it's just that we're really cognizant of development, right? And so every club has to submit reports on who's getting promoted, who's getting hired to the league, so that we can hold all of ourselves accountable to the work. So I think if you're not measuring something, it's probably not important, right? So I think being really deliberate. Now, how you measure that, I think it also goes back, that's nuanced. But so for us, it's employee demographic data, but it's also retention, promotion, advancement, and how we're making sure that as we bring racially and ethnically diverse individuals into Major League Baseball, into the 30 clubs, it's just not only at the entry level, and there are opportunities for career advancement as well.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of kind of employee sentiment tracking, because I think at the end of the day, so much of what we do is to both, you know, ensure the access to opportunity, ensure that people are feeling the effects of the inclusive environment we're trying to create, and also, you know, measuring that with the reality of that end-to-end employee experience. So how are people being developed? How are people moving through the pipeline? Who is getting into leadership, right? What do those pools look like? And so I think that what we could see potentially changing is maybe what external goal setting looks like, or kind of external sharing around those metrics look like, but that doesn't impact our ability to continue to track that internally and have accountability with our leaders. And so really looking at it at employee sentiment, and for a brand as big as ours, you know, our supplier diversity space is also really important to us, and that again is access to opportunity. And so we will continue to always track and understand who has access to the opportunities in our system, how is that increasing, decreasing based on the outreach efforts that we're doing. And so there's a lot of similarities there with our supplier population as with our employees. And so tracking how folks, you know, have access to our system, how they're progressing through our system, and how they feel about whether or not they have equal opportunity to succeed in our system are all the types of measurements that we track and that can absolutely be used for leadership accountability.
We've got another question.
Hi, this question's for Matt. Can you speak a little bit more about the DEI initiatives and programs that the Guardians are doing and how they've impacted the players and the suits on the C-suite?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think what we're doing in Cleveland, it's probably different from what some of the other 29 clubs are doing, but I think we're all in this work with support of MLB. For us, I see it in a couple of different buckets. So one is really increasing the fan experience, right? When you come to a Major League Baseball game, despite opinions on rules that may have changed and pitch clocks, we want to create a compelling fan experience. Right, I think many people will tell you gone are the days where fans are coming to our ballparks just to sit down for 9 innings and watch a baseball game, right? They want the entire experience. So for us, we're developing more deliberate programs around representation, right? And representation that just isn't on a Hispanic heritage or a Noche Latina, but really holistically throughout the 81 home games we play. So that's everything from the food that we're serving to the music we're playing in the ballpark. Can that be reflective of the demographics of fans that we want in our ballpark, the demographics of fans who have been historically excluded? And then internally, I think a lot of it is around, again, cultivating that sense of belonging, whether it's through ERGs or learning and development programs that allow others to become culturally competent and cognizant. And then I'll also speak to the player side quickly because I think that's often lost, and I alluded to it earlier, but for us, again, out of every 4 players comes from Latin America, and historically, we have not done a great job of creating accessible opportunities for them to grow and learn and develop as players. And so we're really cognizant and intentional about how do we incorporate best practices outside of baseball into the way that we're developing players, whether that is ensuring that we have translators and interpreters on hand when a coach is debriefing a game or a play or a hit or a pitch or a swing, but also making sure that we're incorporating culturally relevant and responsive teaching practices into the work so that our players can develop at the same rate as their counterparts who may or may not come from historically marginalized backgrounds.
We do have time for at least one more question. Any other questions? Okay. And as we wrap up, feel free to fill out the survey we have up here with the QR code for the session as well.
So I guess just maybe like a suggestion or thought on like what do the beginning steps look like to start to broach, I guess from like a private sector, start to broach this topic with your customers, both external and internal, right? Because at some point, conversation has to swing that way, right? So what does that look like? I mean, you don't usually just jump into like a campaign. I mean, so how do you, I guess, like soft sell it first or soft serve it and then see where to go from there?
I think it'll probably vary, by industry, but, I always come back to, I know you're talking external, but I always come back to the internal because if we don't get it right with our employees, nothing else really matters. And so for us, that goes to kind of holistic and inclusive experiences in our restaurants that our customers will see, right? And so for us, I think it's a ripple effect of, to your point about, taking care of the players. That is going to have an impact on fans. That's going to have an impact on customers. And so I think that will be the appropriate starting off point for conversations around, well, this is why we have an employee experience that we can be proud of. These efforts are why, and this is how you can come along on the journey. But I think you have to model it, with what's within your control before you start to necessarily roll it out to your customers. But, there's also for us, there's a whole conversation on inclusive marketing that we've really leaned into that captures a lot of these values that we stand for. And so that helps organically tell the story and invite people to come along on the journey for us as well.
I think it's creating opportunities for your entire audience, customer, fan base, students to feel connected to the brand, right? You've got America's favorite hamburger and America's pastime up here. Right, those are.
Do I see a collab brewing?
Right, I know. But those are memories, right? So shame on us if we're not like leveraging that to tell the story, and that's what I think what it goes down to on campuses and higher education institutions, right? You want people to feel like they belong, whether it's at your alma mater, at your favorite restaurant, for your favorite sports team. I think in the corporate space we have the unique ability to use our superpower to do that. but I also imagine it's probably similar in the higher education space as well.
Yeah. Well, first of all, Big Mac is my #1 sandwich.
Oh, thank
Love
you.
it. The fries, forget about it. And then you dip it into the Oreo.
Yes.
Forget it. So let's work on the collab. In higher ed, and again, we have this culture of creating or establishing campus climates, analysis and studies. It's about people, right? Really understanding your internal organization, the people in the organization, the value proposition, and the talent that you have, and how we're supporting them and telling that story. And so it's important to do, and I would assume in corporate America, you would also do a campus an assessment of your organization, the diversity of it, the inclusion, do they feel valued, sense of belonging, et cetera. That then informs our values and our business proposition to how we market ourselves outside, right? And leveraging, and we have a number of marketing firms across higher ed that helps us do these kind of market analysis to say, does the market know who we are? And if not, why? And do we speak to the values that we believe we're sharing with them? And I know we're kind of coming to the end, and again, I want to take the opportunity to capture audience here. While I think this topic is very timely and important, I do want to emphasize in the world of higher education, FAFSA is the #1 challenge in higher education. That's the federal, I don't even know the acronym mean. It's financial aid application to see if you qualify. That is, United States Department of Education has had several delays in rolling out FAFSA. So that is, I think, the #1 challenge that our incoming class is concerned about. And that's across the country, across the world, because we have a lot of international students here in our country. So some do get financial aid, some don't. So I think that's one thing. The other second piece is there is an attack on the business and or value statement around getting a degree, right? There is a campaign that generationally the value of a higher education is not necessary moving forward. And I think that's a really important piece to highlight because the data today still says that a student who graduates with a degree will have a personal financial impact to themselves, but also their immediate family members. And that's so significant for first-gen and low-income and diverse communities that have not been represented in higher education and the workforce. So I think that's the second piece for employers to understand. How do you tell us that that is important, right? And telling the students who are coming that that's important. And also the soft skills, right? Not only is it the hard skills of the degree, but what are the people skills, the soft skills that they can acquire and ascertain as they're seeking your employment. So I just want to highlight that. And then lastly, for my specific community, my biggest challenge, I serve a large population of undocumented students. And it's very hard for them. Every career fair we always have to have a workshop to help them understand what avenues they have to be able to seek employment, and we talk and educate them about how do you converse with a potential employer about being an independent contractor, and what does that look like? And that is, for those of you who are not clear about undocumented peoples, the challenge for that community is that they continue in higher ed moving forward. They don't go in the workforce because they can't get a job. Right? They don't have a social security number, they can't get a job. So what we even do on our campus with the student employees, we can't even hire them in the traditional way. We have to hire them as independent contractors. And I think that's applicable in the real world too. So I just want to highlight that with this capture audience because we need your help in that community.
Yes, thank you, Terry. And I want to quickly state that because they give $12.7 million a semester, cash. Maybe Discover Card too. But undocumented immigrants are the highest enrolling population in the state of Illinois. 216,000 students, right? Right now, the Illinois Dream Fund, after 22 years, is finally on the lottery ticket, right? We're gonna generate $1.7 million in funding to award specifically to undocumented students. In undergrad, we got the MAP funding, right? Undocumented students fought for that, and allies. And now, Fellowships, UCLA just passed this legislation to allow I-10 holders on their campus. I'm like, let's mirror the best practices that are happening across these states. Let's be members of the President's Alliance, but reinvest in our communities. Pay it forward. You know what? Go buy a lottery ticket. It's $5, a triple scratch off, right? You're gonna impact, all the money that we raise this April is gonna impact financially. I wanna enroll 2.5. Meet my challenge. I need to raise 2.5 million. We already have 460,000, and it's only April. But if whatever we get this April will generate the funding to award more students. I want to be like the Gates Millennium, bro. Undergrad, graduate, PhD, let's serve it up. But it takes a reinvestment from you, collectively.
Yeah. All right. Well, with that, we got our call to action. Everybody go buy a lotto ticket and keep the conversation
yes.
going. Thank you so much to our panelists.